The call came in a little after 2 in the afternoon. Tanya was in the kitchen when her phone buzzed on the counter, Victor's name on the screen. She dried her hands on a dish towel and picked up. "Hey!" His voice was flat in a way she recognized but couldn't quite name. Not angry. Not tired exactly. Something further down than tired. So, change of plans. What happened? The guy didn't show. A pause. She heard road noise behind him. He was already in a car moving. Flew out there this morning, drove another 40 minutes to the site, stood around in a field for 2 hours. Nothing. His office finally called and said he was sick. Or something came up. They weren't specific. Tanya leaned against the counter. "Victor, I know," he exhaled. "I know. It's fine. It's just one more thing." He said it the way a person says it's fine when they have stopped believing that phrase means anything. "I'm already on my way to the airport. I'll be home by 7 probably. 8 at the latest." "Okay. You can cancel whatever you had going tonight." "I didn't have anything going." "Good." And then working for it, she could hear him working for it. "Make something good for dinner. Do a little cleaning. Look beautiful. The usual. A beat. I'm kidding about the cleaning." "I know you are," she said. "I'm going to clean anyway." He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost, and she held on to that almost the way you hold on to something small when you're not sure what else there is to hold. "I'll see you tonight," he said. "Drive safe." She set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment without moving. The thing about Victor Marsh was that he had never sounded like that before. Not in 15 years. He was the kind of man who kept his voice level when everything around him was not the kind of man whose calm, early in their marriage, Tanya had sometimes found almost frustrating, because it meant she couldn't always tell what he was actually feeling. She had learned to read the smaller signals, the set of his shoulders, the way he'd get very still and very focused when something was genuinely wrong, the way a well-built structure braces before a storm. This was different. This was a man who had been bracing for a long time and was getting tired. She picked up the dish towel again, folded it, set it on the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the afternoon light was doing what it did in October in Columbus, going gold and a little thin, like it was already apologizing for leaving. She looked around the apartment. She might as well clean. She started in the kitchen and worked her way out. This was how she always cleaned, not room by room in any logical order, but following whatever bothered her first. The kitchen counter, then the hallway, then doubling back to the living room because she'd noticed the baseboards on her way past. It drove Victor crazy, in the most affectionate possible way. "You clean like you're solving a mystery," he'd told her once. "Every room is a new suspect." She'd told him that was the most romantic thing he'd ever said to her. He'd believed her for about 4 seconds before he caught her expression. Victor Marsh could not lie. This was not a moral position, or not only a moral position. It was more like a physiological condition. Not a subtle flush, not a diplomatic deepening of colour, but a full, cartoonish crimson that started at the back of his neck and moved forward with no particular hurry, as though it had nowhere else to be. Tanya had discovered this approximately 3 weeks into knowing him, and had spent the next 15 years making moderate use of it, which she considered one of the quiet pleasures of her marriage. He was serious. He was steady. He had the kind of unhurried competence that made people trust him before he'd said very much, and the kind of bluntness that made them keep trusting him after. He'd grown up with money, real money, generational money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because it's been there long enough to get comfortable. And somehow, none of it had produced in him the particular smoothness that Tanya associated with people who'd grown up that way. He didn't perform ease. He just had it, or he didn't, and when he didn't, he said so. She had not expected to fall for someone like that. She hadn't expected to fall for anyone if she was being honest, which Victor's company tended to make her. "Are you out of your mind?" That had been Irene sitting across from her at a diner booth on Broad Street, staring at Tanya like she'd announced a plan to invest her savings in something obviously ill-advised. "A guy like that is interested in you and you're what you're thinking about it. I'm always thinking about things." "Tanya, I'm not on a fishing trip, Irene. I'm not trying to catch anything. He has a house. His family has multiple houses. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I understand exactly what you're saying. She'd wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. That's the problem. Irene had given her the look, the one that said, I love you and you are genuinely baffling to me, and gone back to her eggs. She'd given that look many times over the years. Tanya had stopped trying to explain herself and started just accepting it as a form of affection. The thing she could never quite make Irene understand was that the money was not the obstacle. The money was not the point in either direction. What she'd been afraid of back at the beginning was simpler than that she'd been afraid of being a person that someone like Victor Marsh wanted for reasons she couldn't account for. She had grown up in a world where nothing was free, where the terms were always stated eventually, even if they weren't stated up front. And she'd needed to understand what the terms were before she could trust anything. It had taken her a while. Victor had waited with the specific patience of someone who understood that waiting was the correct thing to do. 15 years. 2 boys, Alex, who was 20 now, and home for the semester, and Dimi, who was 16, and currently in a phase that involved leaving his shoes in locations that defied spatial logic. She found one under the couch as she swept. She put it on the coffee table where he'd see it. Dimi was named after her father, though she and Victor had never made a production of it. It was just a name they both understood without discussing, and it sat quietly in the household the way certain decisions do when they're made from the right place. 15 years of the same apartment, growing gradually more themselves, books stacked in the places, books accumulate, photographs arranged and rearranged. A kitchen that had produced approximately 10,000 meals and still smelled on good evenings like the garlic bread Victor made badly and with great confidence. And 15 years of one recurring argument, if you could call it that. Tanya didn't snore. She had explained this clearly and repeatedly. Victor claimed otherwise. In the gentle but persistent way he claimed all true things. He had threatened more than once to record her. She had told him to go ahead. He never had, or she assumed he never had. She picked up the mop again and moved down the hallway toward the bedroom. Something at work was wrong. Had been wrong for months. She didn't know the full shape of it, but she knew Victor, and the Victor of the past several months was quieter in the wrong ways, thinner in ways that had nothing to do with eating. And sometimes she'd seen this twice, maybe 3 times. He would stop in the middle of a room as though he'd forgotten where he was going and then collect himself and keep moving. She didn't know how to fix what she couldn't fully see. She kept the refrigerator stocked. She kept the house quiet when he needed quiet. She sat with him on the couch after dinner and didn't ask questions he didn't want to answer, and told herself that was enough. She wasn't entirely sure it was. Natalie Kowalski had come to Columbus from a small town in eastern Ohio, one of those places that shows up on maps, but not in conversations, sometime in her early 20s with a bag, a bus ticket, and the particular determination of someone who has decided that wherever she currently is, she is not staying there. She found work on a commercial cleaning crew within 2 weeks, office buildings mostly. The kind of work that happens at 5 in the morning or 10 at night, when the people whose offices you're cleaning have gone home and don't have to see you doing it. Natalie was good at it. She was fast and thorough and unbothered by the hours, and the woman who ran the crew looked out for her in the way that older women sometimes look out for younger ones when they recognize something familiar. She met Danny Kowalski at 23. He was broad-shouldered and quick to smile, and had the kind of easy confidence that looks at 23 like a promising sign. He was a construction labourer. He had plans. He was always just about to do something, just about to get something going, just about to turn a corner that kept relocating itself slightly further down the road. They got married. They had Tanya. Danny worked when he worked, and drank when he didn't, and gradually those 2 things traded proportions until the drinking was the constant and the work was the occasional interruption. When Tanya was 6, he fell off a scaffold on a job site and broke 2 ribs and his left wrist. The company was small enough that there wasn't much recourse. He came home with a settlement that lasted 4 months and a bitterness that lasted the rest of his life. He wasn't violent exactly. He was loud and careless and present in the way that made a small apartment feel smaller. Natalie worked more. Tanya learned early to read a room to know from the sound of the key in the lock and the weight of footsteps in the hallway what kind of evening it was going to be. When Tanya was 15, Danny went out with the wrong people on a bad night. There was a fight. The details were not complicated: too much alcohol, too many men with the same disposition, and a situation that escalated past the point where anyone involved had the judgment to stop it. He was arrested. He was in custody for 6 months before he died quietly, from causes that were officially unremarkable and personally devastating in the way of all things that happened to people who were already running out of runway. Tanya did not fall apart. She had not been built for falling apart. What she had been built for by years of watching her mother get up every morning and go do the thing that needed doing was endurance with a straight spine. She was not quiet about where she came from. This was the thing people sometimes misread about her. When other kids used her family against her, and they did the way kids do, with the specific cruelty of people who have found a weak spot and intend to use it, she didn't go silent or look at the floor. She looked directly at the person who'd said it, and she said something back, and it was almost never the thing they expected. It got her sent to the principal's office with some regularity. It also meant that by high school, most people had stopped trying. She wasn't hard. She was precise. There is a difference, and Natalie had taught her that difference, without ever stating it explicitly by example over many years. She went to Ohio State on financial aid and part-time work, and a stubbornness about finishing what she started. She got a teaching degree because she had stood in enough classrooms where the unspoken assumption was that some kids mattered more than others, and she had decided early that she was not going to be someone who let that assumption stand unchallenged. The first day she had her own classroom, she stood at the front and looked at 22 8-year-olds, looking back at her, and she understood cleanly, immediately, exactly why she had wanted this. She called her mother that evening. Natalie had said, "I knew you'd figure it out." She usually did. What she had not figured on was Victor. The house was in Dublin, one of those older streets where the lots were wide and the trees had been there long enough to mean it. Victor pulled into the driveway and Tanya sat with her seatbelt still fastened for a moment longer than necessary, looking at the house through the windshield. It was large. Of course, it was large. It had the confidence of a house that had been well maintained for decades, rather than recently renovated for impression. Dark brick, deep porch, a side yard with an oak tree that had clearly been winning arguments with the fence for years. The garden was real, not decorative. Someone actually worked in it. "Ready," Victor said. "Give me a second." He gave her a second. He was good at that. She had built a fairly detailed picture of how this afternoon was going to go. The picture involved careful furniture and careful smiles and conversations that stayed in the shallow end by mutual unspoken agreement. She had prepared herself to be received, to be assessed with courtesy, to understand by the end of the evening exactly where she stood without anyone having said a word about it directly. She unbuckled her seatbelt. What she walked into was Gerald Marsh, standing on the back patio over a cast-iron pot, roughly the diameter of a truck tire, wearing an apron that said "Grill Sergeant" in faded letters, and arguing cheerfully with no one in particular about the correct ratio of cumin to coriander. "She's here, she's here." He turned from the pot with the spatula still in his hand and the full attention of a man who had been genuinely looking forward to this. "Tanya, come over here and tell me if this smells right to you, because your future mother-in-law has opinions about the spices and I need a second vote." "Gerald." Ellen's voice came from the patio table, where she was setting out napkins with the focused energy of someone who had been losing this particular argument for 30 years and intended to keep losing it with dignity. "She just walked in. She's got a nose, hasn't she?" He was already steering Tanya toward the pot, with a hand on her shoulder, completely unself-conscious about it. "Here." "What do you smell?" Tanya leaned over the pot. The smell hit her like a memory. She didn't have lamb and rice, and something warm and slightly floral underneath cumin, definitely, and something else she couldn't name. "It smells incredible," she said honestly. Gerald pointed the spatula at his wife. "Second vote. Motion carries." The motion, Ellen said, was never in dispute. The motion was always going to pass. "You just wanted an audience." But she was smiling, and it was not a performance of smiling. It was the real kind, worn smooth by repetition. The plov was eaten with hands. Gerald announced this as a matter of historical record. His old business partner from Tashkent had taught him the recipe 20 years ago and had made him promise to honor it properly, which meant no forks, which meant the bowls stayed in the cabinet, which meant Ellen's napkins were in fact the crucial concession they appeared to be. Tanya had arrived braced for the wrong meal entirely. What she got was rice and lamb eaten off a communal platter on a warm October afternoon, Gerald, telling a story about the first time he'd made this dish and set off the smoke alarm twice. Ellen, correcting the timeline of the story with the precision of someone who had been correcting it for years, Victor eating with the contentment of a man who was home. She watched them. She was good at watching. It was a skill you developed when you'd grown up needing to read rooms quickly. What she was watching for was the seam. The place where the warmth became performance, where the ease became effort. She watched through the whole meal and the clean-up after, and the hour on the patio with the light going low and gold through the oak tree. She didn't find it. Ellen walked her to the car while Victor helped Gerald carry the pot inside. "I want to say something," Ellen said, "and I'd like you to let me finish it before you respond." Tanya stopped. "I was surprised." Ellen looked at her with the same directness she'd been using all evening, the kind that wasn't unkind but wasn't soft either. "When Victor told us about you, I want to be honest about that. The women he'd spent time with before were," she paused, chose the word, "carefully different. And I noticed. I'm telling you I noticed because I think it's more respectful than pretending I didn't." She let that land. "What I also want to say is that I watched you tonight. And what I saw was my son being himself, completely himself, in a way that I am not always sure he gets to be." She was quiet for a moment. "That matters more to me than anything else. It's the only thing that actually matters." She said good night and went back inside. Tanya sat in the passenger seat and stared through the windshield at the oak tree while Victor started the car. She believed her. That was the thing. She had come here expecting not to, and she did. They got married the following spring. Not the wedding Victor had imagined. He'd had ideas that involved square footage Tanya found genuinely alarming, but something real with the people they actually wanted there. It was a good day. In the years after, Tanya would sometimes hear at family dinners or in passing conversation the edges of a name, a half-finished sentence, a topic that changed direction just before it arrived somewhere. She learned not to ask. The Marshes were in almost every way the most open people she'd ever known. Almost every way. There was a brother, older. He had been gone for a long time. She left it alone. Alex was born about 2 years into the marriage. Demi came 3 years after that. The house expanded to fit them, not physically, though they did eventually claim the finished basement as a second living room once the boys hit middle school, but in the way that houses expand when they're being genuinely used. Backpacks by the door, cereal boxes left open on the counter, a calendar on the refrigerator that was always slightly behind the old month not quite turned over. Victor coached Alex's soccer team for 2 seasons and was by his own admission not very good at it, but Alex remembered it as one of his favorite things, which Tanya considered a reasonable return on investment. She taught 4th grade for 7 years, then moved to 5th, then back to 4th because she missed that age, old enough to reason with, young enough to still believe that school might have something to offer them. She was good at it. Not in a way that got her a lot of formal recognition, but in the way that meant kids came back years later to tell her things. It was a good life. She had known it was a good life while she was living it, which she understood was not something everyone got. The snoring argument had become, by the time the boys were in high school, something close to a household institution. It went like this, Victor would mention with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a weather report that she had snored the previous night. Tanya would deny it with the confidence of someone who had never once snored in her life and did not intend to start. Victor would note that denial was not the same as evidence. Tanya would note that accusation was not the same as evidence either. Victor would threaten to record her. Tanya would tell him to go right ahead. Nothing would happen. 3 months later, the whole thing would begin again. Alex had at some point started timing how long the argument lasted before someone changed the subject. His record was 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He was proud of this in a way that said something about the household he'd grown up in, that this was the kind of thing worth measuring. because it was reliably funny and reliably harmless, and they all knew it. Then came the past 12 months. It started with contracts, two large ones, both in the final stages of negotiation, both gone quiet, and then gone entirely the clients, citing vague concerns, scheduling conflicts, a decision to go another direction. Victor had lost contracts before. That was business. What bothered him was that he couldn't find the seam, couldn't locate the moment where something had shifted, or where he'd miscalculated. The losses had no visible cause. Then the audits. 3 in 8 months, state licensing board, then an OSHA compliance review, then a tax authority inquiry that took 6 weeks to resolve and found nothing because there was nothing to find. Each one was defensible. Each one was expensive in time and attention, and the specific energy that doesn't refill quickly. Victor hired an attorney to monitor for patterns. The attorney found the complaints had originated from different sources and saw no clear connection. The complaints had been filed anonymously, which was common enough that it offered no useful trail. Then the documents. A set of files went missing from the main office, confidential materials about upcoming bids, projected timelines, the kind of information that was valuable specifically to competitors. The security team spent 3 weeks on it. They found no clean answer. Victor let 2 people go, tightened the access protocols, started coming in an hour earlier and leaving an hour later, and said almost nothing about any of it at home. Tanya watched him get smaller. That was the only word for it. Not physically smaller, he was still tall, still the same man, but the ease that had always been part of him, that quality of occupying a room without effort, was quietly leaving. He moved carefully now. Ate less. Laughed less. Stopped doing the thing where he'd stand at the kitchen window with his coffee on Saturday mornings and just look out at the yard like a man with nowhere he'd rather be. She kept dinner on the table. She kept the house quiet on the evenings he needed quiet. She sat with him and didn't push because pushing was not what he needed, and she knew it. Then one evening in September, he raised his voice at Dimmy over something small, a missed obligation. The details barely mattered, and the sound of it stopped the whole house. Tanya froze in the kitchen doorway. Dimmy went very still. Victor stopped mid-sentence, and the look on his face in the silence that followed was worse than the raised voice had been. He apologized to Dimmy immediately, then again after dinner, then once more before bed. He came to Tanya afterward and apologized to her too, though she hadn't been the target. "I don't know where that came from," he said. She didn't say what she thought, which was, "I do." A few weeks later, she was loading the dishwasher when he came in from the office and dropped his bag and said, with the first real looseness she'd heard in his voice in months, "Inga stayed until 8 again to get the Hendricks file sorted before the deadline. I don't know what I'd do without her right now. Genuinely." Tanya had said something agreeable, filed the name away as a small good thing, someone reliable, in a season of unreliable things. Then this afternoon, the phone call. Victor on his way home from a meeting that had never happened, sounding like a man counting something he was afraid to count. She picked up the mop. She had always liked cleaning. This was not something she advertised. It sounded, when stated plainly, like the kind of thing a person said to make themselves seem more agreeable, but it was true. There was something in the physical logic of it that satisfied her. You started with disorder. You applied effort. You got order. The transaction was honest in a way that a lot of transactions were not. And this was her house. That still meant something to her 15 years in, maybe more than it had at the beginning, when the size of it had felt slightly surreal, like staying somewhere on vacation. She knew where everything was. She knew which drawer stuck and which window latch needed 2 hands and which floorboard in the hallway sang if you stepped on it at the wrong angle. She had mopped this floor more times than she could count. She had found things under furniture that told the whole story of raising 2 boys in one place for 15 years. Today was no different. In the living room, 2 mismatched socks that had clearly been there long enough to become furniture, a phone charger with a fraying end she'd been meaning to throw out for a month, and a receipt from a gas station that she couldn't account for and chose not to examine too closely. In the hallway, a library book that had been renewed twice. Behind the bathroom door, one of Alex's sneakers, which had no business being there and declined to explain itself. She worked steadily. The apartment came clean around her. She saved the bedroom for last. It was the room she was most particular about. She couldn't have said exactly why. Maybe because it was the one room in the house that was entirely theirs. No backpacks, no controllers left on the floor, no evidence of anyone under 20. She changed the sheets. She straightened the things on Victor's nightstand, which had a tendency toward entropy. A novel, face down at the same page it had been face down on for 3 weeks. His watch, a pen with no cap, a folded piece of paper she recognized as a hardware store list from sometime last winter. She left all of it where it was. That was his nightstand. She had her own. She ran the vacuum, then switched to the mop for the hardwood border around the rug. She worked her way around the perimeter of the room, and then by habit pushed the mop head into the gap under the bed. Something shifted. A soft knock of object against wood, then a small slide. She frowned, got down on one knee and looked. Something small and rectangular pushed slightly out of position by the mop. She reached under and pulled it out and held it in the light. A digital recorder. Small, black, the kind that sat on a desk or slipped into a jacket pocket. The kind used for notes, dictation, memos, practical, unremarkable, not the sort of thing that belonged on the floor under anyone's bed. She turned it over in her hand. And then she understood. She actually laughed. A short, involuntary sound aimed at no one because she was completely alone in the apartment. Victor Marsh had finally done it. After 15 years of threats, after 15 years of her daring him to prove it, he had gone out and obtained a recording device and placed it under their bed like a man with a mission. She found the rewind button. Let it spin back a few seconds. Pressed play. What came out of the small speaker was without any question her own voice. A soft, rhythmic, entirely undeniable sound. Not loud. Not the theatrical snoring of cartoons, but real, present, consistent. She sat down on the edge of the bed and put her face in her free hand. 15 years. She had maintained her position for 15 years with complete conviction, and she had been wrong for every single one of them. She was going to have to tell him. She was already thinking about how to do it, whether to bring it up immediately when he walked in or to let him shower first, whether to lead with the apology or the acknowledgement, whether there was any version of this that preserved even a small amount of her dignity. There was not. She accepted this. She was still smiling when she rewound it a little further, not for any particular reason. Just the idle curiosity of a person who has just lost a long argument and wants to know how long ago the evidence was gathered. She pressed play again. The snoring stopped. A few seconds of ambient sound, the soft static of a recording made in a quiet room, and then a voice. A man's voice. Low measured the register of someone speaking carefully and with intention. Not a message, not a memo. A conversation. There was a woman on the other end of it, and the woman sounded like she was asking for reassurance, and the man was giving it to her. Inga. He said her name the way you say the name of someone you've been saying for a while. We've talked about this. The woman said something Tanya couldn't fully make out. The recording had caught her at a distance, her voice thinner than his. I know, the man said. I know it feels like that, but I need you to trust me. As soon as I have what I need, we leave. All of this a brief pause, all of this goes away, and we start over somewhere else. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. Inga's voice again, still at the edge of the recording, something that sounded like doubt. I love you, the man said. Simple, unhurried, like a fact. I'm going to marry you. But right now, if we move too fast, we lose everything. You're smart enough to understand that. You've always been smart enough to understand that. Tanya's thumb found the stop button. The room was very quiet. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't remember deciding to sit. She was holding the recorder in both hands, with the careful attention of someone handling something they're not sure is stable, and she was looking at the middle distance. And for a stretch of time, she couldn't have measured that was all that was happening. The voice on the tape was Victor's voice. She had not questioned it for a single moment. The cadence, the register, the way he had of slowing down on certain words to give them weight, she had been listening to that voice for 16 years. She knew it the way you know a sound that has been part of your daily life for so long it stops being a sound and starts being a given. Inga. She had filed that name away 3 weeks ago as a small good thing. Someone reliable. I don't know what I'd do without her right now. She set the recorder down on the nightstand. Very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady and you don't want to acknowledge that. She was not the kind of person who fell apart. She knew this about herself. What happened instead when something hit hard enough was a temporary suspension, like a system shutting down non-essential functions to protect the core. Sound went first. The ambient noise of the apartment, the street outside, all of it receded to something distant and irrelevant. Then the light seemed to change, though she understood it hadn't the room exactly as it had been the October afternoon, still doing what October afternoons did through the window. What remained in the quiet was the assembling. She didn't want to do it. She did it anyway, because her mind was not going to leave it alone, and the only way through was through. She went back over the past 12 months, the way you go back over something you've misread, looking for the version that makes sense now. The business trips. More of them lately, and farther. The stress she'd attributed entirely to the contracts, the audits, the stolen files. Victor, in the office, until 8-9 later. Victor with his phone angled slightly away, which she had noticed and immediately decided not to notice. Inga's name, said with a warmth that she had heard as professional, as collegial, as the simple relief of having one competent person in a difficult season. I don't know what I'd do without her. She sat with all of it. Outside, a car went past on the street below. Someone's dog barked twice and stopped. The light through the window moved the way light moves in late afternoons, slowly, without asking permission. She did not cry. That wasn't where she was. Crying required a kind of feeling that hadn't arrived yet. What was there instead was something flatter and colder. The specific numbness of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was not what they thought it was, and hasn't yet figured out what to do with their weight. She didn't move for a long time. She heard the front door. She heard him, before she saw him, the sequence of sounds that was Victor coming home. Key in the lock, the specific resistance of the front door that he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, the brief shuffle of shoes coming off in the entryway. A bag set down. The small exhale of a man who has been travelling since morning and is relieved to be somewhere that belongs to him. Hello, his voice was lighter than it had been on the phone. Being home did that to him usually. No welcoming committee. He came around the corner into the living room and stopped. She was sitting in the armchair by the window. She hadn't turned on the lamp. The room was in that late evening state between enough light and not enough, and she was just sitting in it, her hands in her lap, the recorder on the end table beside her. Victor looked at her. His expression moved through several things quickly, surprise, then uncertainty, then the careful attention of a man recalibrating. Hey! He crossed the room and crouched down in front of her, trying to get level with her face. What's wrong? Did something happen? She looked at him. Tanya. His voice was careful now. Talk to me. She picked up the recorder and set it on the coffee table between them without saying anything. He looked at it. Then something shifted in his face, not quite relief, but something adjacent to it. He sat back on the couch and ran a hand over his jaw. Okay. A short breath. Okay, fair. You found it. He almost smiled. I was going to tell you. I was going to make more of a production out of it, but he gestured at the recorder. You found it first. So. How bad is it? Tanya said nothing. Come on. Gently. I know you're annoyed. You have every right to be annoyed. But we both know what's on there. And we both know I've been right about this for 15 years, so I listened past the snoring, she said. He stopped. I rewound it. Her voice came out even, which surprised her. A little further back. And I listened. Victor looked at her with no expression she could read. What do you mean? It wasn't a question. It was a man carefully repeating words back to make sure he'd heard them right. There's a conversation on there, she said. A man and a woman. He calls her Inga. The silence in the room was total. He tells her he loves her, Tanya said. That he's going to marry her. That they just have to wait until he has what he needs and then they'll leave. She paused. I recognized the voice. Victor was very still. You're a stranger to me, she said. I know that sounds. I know how it sounds. But that's what it felt like sitting here. Like I'd been living with someone I didn't actually know. Tanya, don't. Not loud. Just certain. He didn't. She reached over and picked up the recorder. She found the place, pressed play. The voice came out of the small speaker and filled the quiet room. Victor listened with his head slightly bowed, and his face did not do what she had expected a guilty face to do. It did not close, or go careful, or arrange itself into anything managed. It did something she didn't have a name for, a kind of arrested attention, like a man who has heard something from very far away and is trying to locate where it came from. She stopped the tape. He reached out, and she let him take the recorder. He played the section again, himself, alone with it. Then, he set it down. He stood up. He picked up the recorder and put it in his jacket pocket. "I need to go," he said. "Right now." He looked at her directly, and whatever was in his face was not guilt. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back, and I'll explain everything. I promise you." He was gone before she could answer. The apartment was quiet. It was the same apartment it had been that morning. Same rooms, same furniture, same October dark coming in through the windows. It felt completely different, and she couldn't have said exactly why, except that she was alone in it now in a way she hadn't been in 15 years. She sat back down. She waited. He was gone for a little over 2 hours. Tanya didn't move much. She made tea at some point, and left most of it. She sat in the kitchen for a while, then back in the living room, then in the kitchen again. Not because either room was better, but because staying still felt harder than it should have, and moving helped marginally. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't call anyone. There was no one to call, not for this, not yet, maybe not ever, depending on what the next few hours looked like. She heard the key in the lock just before 9. Victor came in quietly. He set his jacket over the back of a chair, sat down on the couch across from her, and looked at her for a moment without speaking. He looked exhausted in a way that was different from the exhaustion she'd been watching accumulate for months. That had been the exhaustion of sustained pressure. This was something older. "I talked to Inga," he said. Tanya waited. She confirmed everything. It took a few minutes. She tried to get around it first, but she didn't hold out long. He paused. "She's not a bad person. I want to say that because I think it's true, even right now. She made a serious mistake, and she knows it." "Victor, gently. Start from the beginning." He nodded, looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "I have a brother," he said. "His name is Anton." She knew the outline, the name that never came up comfortably, the topic that changed direction before it arrived anywhere. She had never pushed. Now she sat still and let him tell it. Anton was Gerald and Ellen's first child, born when they were both freshmen at Ohio State, 19 years old, nowhere near ready, doing the best they could with what they had. By the time Victor came along more than 2 decades later, Anton was already a grown man. Victor had been in every practical sense an only child. He had dim memories of a large presence at Christmas one year, a voice on the phone that his mother's face changed for. That was most of it. The clearest thing he said was the voice. Ellen had always remarked on it, "You two sound so alike, it's unsettling," but Victor had had so few real conversations with Anton that it had never meant much to him. The falling out had happened years before Tanya was in the picture. Anton had been working inside the family business. Gerald had brought him in, had wanted to give him something, had believed, perhaps too generously, that the distance between them could be closed with proximity and shared work. What Gerald found instead after 2 years was that Anton had been feeding proprietary information to a competitor, not casually, systematically, with the patience of someone who had been planning something for a long time. When Gerald confronted him, it was ugly in the way that family confrontations about money and betrayal are ugly. Things were said that don't unsay themselves. Gerald had recovered. He was that kind of man, the kind who gets angry and then gets over it, who would rather have his son back than be right. He had tried. Ellen had tried. Victor had driven to Seattle himself 8 years ago, knocked on a door in a neighborhood near the water, and stood on the front step while Anton looked at him through the screen and told him he didn't have a family, that he hadn't had one for a long time, that Victor had inherited everything that should have been split differently, and that he had nothing to say to any of them. Victor had driven back to the airport and not talked about it much afterward. "I didn't think he'd come back," Victor said. "After all that time, I stopped thinking about it." But Anton had come back. Not in person, More carefully than that. Sometime in the past year, he had found Inga. Victor didn't know yet how, whether through the company's public profile, through someone who knew someone, through simple research. What he knew was that Anton had been thorough and patient. He'd approached her slowly, built something that looked like a relationship, and eventually had told her who he was and what he believed he was owed. He'd told her the family had pushed him out, that the company should have been partly his. That he wasn't asking her to do anything wrong, just to help him get access to what was rightfully his before he made his move. The documents, the regulatory complaints filed anonymously through channels that were common enough to leave no useful trail. Tips to competitors about upcoming bids. The investor who hadn't shown up today, the one Victor had staked real hope on, Anton, had gotten there first. Inga had gone along with it, and then, at some point, she had stopped fully believing him. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't stopped helping him either. What she had done was make a recording, one conversation, comprehensive, his voice and his promises and his instructions. She'd left the recorder on her desk, labelled with the office's general supply tape. Victor had grabbed it on his way out the door that morning, mistaking it for the company's shared dictation device. He looked at Tanya across the coffee table. "The voice you heard," he said. "It wasn't me." The room was quiet for a moment. Tanya thought about the afternoon, the hours in the armchair, the assembling of evidence she hadn't wanted to assemble, the efficient, terrible way she had built a case against the person she trusted most, using nothing but a voice she recognized, and a season of worry she'd been carrying alone. "I know," she said. And she did. She had felt it somewhere, in the long wait, the certainty arriving quietly, the way some true things do, not with force, but with the specific relief of something finally making sense. She had just needed to hear him say it. Victor looked at her with the effort of a man who didn't usually let things show, deciding to let something show. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it. The months of not telling you how bad it was. Tonight. All of it. You don't have to. I do, actually. Not defensive. Just certain. You sat here for 2 hours thinking." He stopped, started again. "You shouldn't have had to do that." She looked at him across the table. Thinner than he should be, tired in ways that would take time to undo, but there. Present. Completely himself. "Come here," she said. They stayed like that for a while, her on the couch, him beside her, close enough that she could feel him breathing. Nobody talked. The apartment settled around them the way apartments do at night, small sounds, the refrigerator, a car outside, the ordinary evidence of a house that was still intact. Then Victor said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "I've been thinking on the drive back." He paused. "About how this happened. How any of this came out tonight." Another pause longer. "Tanya, do you understand what actually found that recorder?" She leaned back far enough to look at him. His expression was caught somewhere between exhausted and something else entirely. "If you don't snore," he said carefully, "I never buy the recorder. If I never buy the recorder, I never put it under the bed. If I never put it under the bed, you find nothing when you clean today. The recorder stays on Inga's desk indefinitely. Anton keeps going. The company keeps bleeding." He looked at her. "We probably survive it, but we don't stop it. Not like this. Not tonight." Tanya stared at him. "Your snoring," he said with great seriousness, "may have saved the company." She heard herself laugh before she decided to. A real one, the kind that comes up without asking, and once it started it kept going, and Victor went with it. And for a minute they were just two people laughing in a room where an hour ago one of them had sat alone in the dark, and the reason they were laughing was the most undignified, unglamorous, thoroughly human thing imaginable. When it settled, she wiped her eyes. 15 years, she said. 15 years, he agreed. She leaned her head back against his shoulder. Outside, Columbus did what it always did, kept going, indifferent and familiar, the city they had built a life inside of without it ever once asking them their permission.